Strip for inspection, they said, sneering. She unzipped her suit slowly. One man coughed a laugh, another fake-checked his watch. Then she turned. Silence. No one expected to see that the mark on her spine. A code. Classified. Unauthorized. The commander walked in just as the laughter died. He saw it. He knew. It was a classified designation from a unit that wasn't supposed to exist, and for the first time they were scared. Want to know what he said next? Drop a comment and subscribe. We post every day. She didn't look like much. Mid-50s, maybe older. Hair pulled back tight, streaked with gray. Coveralls faded frayed at the sleeves. No name patch, no attitude, just a battered clipboard and a toolbox that looked like it had seen a war. Most of the kids in that hangar barely noticed her when she walked in. And why would they? She didn't talk much. She didn't swagger. She didn't act like she had anything to prove. But you could tell if you were paying attention that she moved with purpose. Every step deliberate. Every motion clean. Like someone who'd done this job so many times, muscle memory did the talking. Her name was Eleanor Rowe, civilian contractor. On paper, just here to assess the tail assembly on a grounded Blackhawk. Jake Mitchell, 23. The kind of corporal who thought loud meant right, glanced up from his workstation. Saw her, smirked. Didn't know we were outsourcing to grandmas now. He meant it as a joke. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. But here's the thing about old mechanics: they don't argue. They wait. Because they know the work always speaks louder. And hers was about to. You could feel the shift, even if no one said anything. Ellie walked over to the check-in desk, signed her name with blocky military-grade handwriting like someone who learned to write with gloves on in a tent under mortar fire. The duty sergeant glanced at the clipboard, blinked, then looked again. Said nothing. But something in his face changed. Like he'd just recognized something, and didn't know what to do with it. Jake watched it all from across the room, arms crossed, chin up, like he ran the damn place. He leaned over to the airman beside him, whispered something. They both chuckled. Then he called out loud enough for everyone to hear. "Hey, ma'am, you know where the avionics bay is, or should I draw you a map?" She looked up. No anger, no sarcasm, just a calm, level stare. Like she'd seen that exact performance 1,000 times before, and knew how it ended. "I'm here for the structural inspection," she said, handing over her clearance. He took the folder from her slowly, like he thought he might catch something from it. "Sure," he muttered, flipping through the documents, pretending to read. "Let's make sure you're not touching things you don't understand." And that was his first mistake. There's a certain way people look at you when they've already decided who you are. Jake had that look. He held her clearance papers like they were props in some little game he was playing, pointed at stamps like he knew what they meant, raised an eyebrow at acronyms he didn't even recognize. A few of the younger techs gathered behind him, watching, waiting, feeding off the show. "Structural inspection doesn't mean avionics access," Jake said loud enough for the whole hangar to hear. Ellie didn't blink. She didn't get flustered. She didn't shrink. It does. Since 2018, Section 9B, a quiet reply. Not defiant, just correct. Behind Jake, someone chuckled. A kid barely out of training with soft hands and polished boots. Jake's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to being corrected, especially not by someone twice his age and 5 times more competent. He leaned in, voice lower now. "New electromagnetic protocols. Need to verify you're not carrying any unauthorized tech." Ellie just looked at him. Not scared, not confused, just disappointed. The kind of disappointment that says, "You're not the first, but you could have been better," and he felt it. But he pushed anyway. Most people would have walked away, called for a supervisor, filed a complaint, said something. Ellie did none of that. She stood there still as concrete while Jake kept talking. Loud, smug, like he thought volume was authority. Phones, recording devices, transmitters, could be hidden anywhere, even in underlayers. A beat. Then he said it flat, unblinking standard procedure. "You'll need to remove your top. Full compliance check." The hangar got quiet. Not silent, but the kind of quiet where even tools seemed to lower their volume. Conversations faded. Movements slowed. The kind of quiet that happens when everyone knows a line just got crossed, but no one's brave enough to call it. One of the airmen, Rodriguez, shifted uncomfortably. Another muttered, "This isn't right." But Jake wasn't listening. He had an audience now. He was playing a role, puffed up and proud, pretending this wasn't about control. And Ellie, she looked at him, not like a victim, not like a soldier, like a woman who had been here before, too many times, and had finally stopped expecting anyone to step in. She could have said no, could have asked for a superior, could have reminded him there was no such procedure, but she didn't. Instead, she set her clipboard down quietly on the edge of the nearest workbench, untied the sleeves of her coveralls, pulled them down to her waist. No drama, no protest, just calm, practiced movement, like she'd done it before, too many times. A few of them stared, not out of professionalism, but out of something uglier. One of the younger ones even raised his phone again. Rodriguez snapped, "Put that damn thing away." But no one really stopped it. Ellie stood there in a plain gray t-shirt. No jewelry, no badge, nothing but calloused hands and worn-down boots and the quiet kind of dignity no one bothered to see. Jake smirked. "Turn around." And she did. Slowly. Deliberately. Like she knew what was about to happen would stick with them longer than anything they'd ever post online. And it did. When she turned, it was like someone cut the air. No one spoke. No one breathed. Even the tools seemed to stop spinning. Down the center of her spine, clear as daylight, was a black tattoo. Not decorative, not stylish. Precise. Stark. At the top, a downward-facing triangle. Beneath it, 5 characters V03147. At the base, an eagle wings spread claws bared. Jake blinked confused. Morrison snorted half-laughing. "What is that, some biker thing Chen kept recording? Looks old. Probably from her glory days in the Guard. But Rodriguez..." He didn't laugh. He just stared like he'd seen something he wasn't supposed to, because he had. His grandfather once showed him a photo, black and white, nearly burnt. Same triangle, same code. Right before he said, "This unit never existed. And if anyone ever asks, you've never seen that." Now, standing in a dusty hangar was a woman they all dismissed wearing a ghost's signature. And just then, the hangar doors opened. And in walked Colonel Harlan. He took one look at Ellie's back and dropped the file in his hand. The folder hit the concrete with a slap that echoed. Colonel David Harlan stood frozen. His eyes locked on that tattoo like it had punched a hole through time. His officers looked at him confused. "Sir," but he didn't answer. His voice came out low, tight. Jesus Christ. Jake finally noticed the change in the room. The silence wasn't awkward anymore. It was heavy, like everyone had just realized they were standing somewhere they shouldn't be. "Is there a problem, sir?" Jake asked, still trying to hold authority in his voice. Harlan didn't even look at him. "Who authorized this inspection?" "It was just a routine." "Shut up." That's when it hit Jake, not because anyone told him, but because the colonel, a man who didn't flinch at explosions, just flinched at a tattoo. Ellie hadn't moved. Still standing in her shirt back turned, still silent. Harlan stepped forward slowly, like approaching something sacred or dangerous. "Ma'am, you can get dressed." His tone had changed, not commanding, not cautious, something else, respect, or maybe fear. Ellie didn't rush to cover herself. She didn't panic, didn't try to explain. She just reached down, picked up her coveralls and pulled them back on with the same quiet care she'd shown pulling them off. Each movement precise. Measured. Like someone who'd learned a long time ago that dignity has nothing to do with what you're wearing and everything to do with how you carry yourself when no one else stands with you. No anger, no trembling hands, only control. Across the room, Chen was still holding his phone frozen like a statue. "Sir, should I delete this, or—" Harlan turned to him. His voice came back cold. "You'll delete it, now, or I'll make sure your next assignment involves scrubbing latrines in Greenland." Chen didn't argue. His fingers moved fast. Ellie zipped up the front of her suit, tied the sleeves around her waist. Then, calm as ever, picked up her clipboard. It was like nothing had happened. Except, everyone knew something had, and no one would forget it. Colonel Harlan stepped closer, but he didn't speak right away. He just studied her. Not like a commanding officer looks at a subordinate, but like a man staring at something he thought was long gone. "Task Force. Viper was shut down in 2012, he said quietly. Ellie didn't flinch, didn't blink. Officially, she replied. That was all. No explanation, no names, no backstory. But it was enough. Harlan nodded once like a man trying to put a lid back on something that should have stayed buried. He lowered his voice barely more than a whisper. "There's no record of your service, no surviving mission logs. That was the whole point, wasn't it?" Ellie didn't answer, just stared at the checklist in her hands like it still mattered, like the work still came first. After all that? He murmured. You're still inspecting tail rotors. It's what needs doing, she said. That's enough. And somehow, in that one sentence, she reminded everyone watching what real duty actually looked like. No one moved. Colonel Harlan stood face to face with Ellie now, closer than anyone had dared. But still, she didn't speak. He studied her like he was looking through time, and then softer than expected, he said, You were Bravo Lead, Kandahar, March 2011. Ellie said nothing, but the flicker in her eyes, that was enough. Behind them, the younger crew looked lost, confused. But Rodriguez, he understood, because only a handful of people knew what had happened in Kandahar. A chopper shot down. A mission scrubbed. 3 names listed as MIA. Never recovered, never mentioned again, except one. Came back. I read the debrief, Harlan continued, voice tight. They said you walked 38 miles, through enemy lines, carried intel in your boot. Ellie finally looked at him. Not my intel, she said. Was his. I just didn't want it left behind. That silence that followed, it wasn't awkward, it was reverence. For the kind of hero who didn't need statues, just a wrench. And a damn quiet place to work. Colonel Harlan didn't ask any more questions. Because men like him, men who'd read redacted reports and sat through classified briefings, they knew what questions not to ask. He simply nodded, almost to himself. We thought you were dead, he said. Ellie shrugged, eyes already drifting back to her checklist. I was. For a little while. No drama. No need to elaborate. Just the kind of truth that sits quiet and heavy. Rodriguez took a step forward. He was shaking a little, but not from fear. Ma'am, was it true that you took down a comms tower with a flare gun? Ellie paused just long enough. Wrong caliber. Wasn't a flare gun. Then she turned back to her clipboard like the conversation was over. It was. Because people like Ellie didn't relive war stories for applause. They survived them, buried them, and got back to work. And in that hangar surrounded by silence and shame, she was already walking toward the helicopter. Because broken machines don't fix themselves. And she wasn't there for recognition. She was there for the work. No one told her what to do next. She didn't need permission. Ellie moved across the hangar like she had before, steady, quiet, focused. Only this time, no one dared look at her the same way. The Blackhawk sat in Bay 7 nose cone half-open rotor assembly, mid-disassembled. The maintenance crew had started the job, but it wasn't finished. It wasn't ready. Ellie ran her fingers along the frame slowly like she was listening. Not to noise, but to memory. You could almost feel it, that strange respect that doesn't get clapped for, doesn't get announced. It just exists, and everyone knows it. Rodriguez followed a few paces behind, not speaking, just watching. He wasn't ordered to help, he just felt like he should. Why'd you come back, ma'am? He asked almost under his breath. Ellie didn't stop working. Because this thing's flying tomorrow, she said, tapping the strut gently, and someone's son or daughter's gonna be inside it. That was it. No speech, no lesson. Just a reminder, she wasn't here for legacy. She was here to make sure someone got home alive. Ellie didn't rush. She didn't need to. Every movement had its reason. Wrist turns pressure checks the way she tapped a bolt twice but tightened it once. Rodriguez stood off to the side, arms crossed, but not in judgment anymore. More like awe. He'd spent years learning systems from manuals and simulators. But what she did, that wasn't in any binder. She paused, pressed 2 fingers along the edge of a hydraulic line, then looked up. Number 2, pumps running hot. Rodriguez blinked. We haven't powered the system. Ellie nodded toward the casing. Feel the tension, metals slightly warped, means expansion, heat's building before activation. He stepped over, touched it like she had. He felt it too. No instruments, no diagnostics, just fingertips time and someone who'd spent more nights under machines than in a bed. Rodriguez exhaled. How'd you learn all this? Ellie didn't even look up, by needing to know, when nobody else was coming. And just like that, he understood. Some people get trained. Others survive long enough to become the training. The longer she worked, the quieter the hangar became. Not out of tension anymore, but out of respect. Ellie crouched under the tailboom hand sliding across a section most techs skip over. Her thumb paused on a seam no thicker than a pencil line. She tapped it twice. Rodriguez leaned in. Crack hairline, she said. Not enough to trip the scanner. But it'll grow, fast, especially at altitude. He pulled out his tablet, checked the last 3 diagnostics. Nothing flagged. Nothing even close. But that seam, it was real and dangerous. "How'd you catch that?" he asked. Ellie wiped her hands, leaned back on her heels. "Because I've seen what it looks like after it fails. Not angry, not dramatic, just honest." And something in Rodriguez shifted, like he was starting to realize that knowledge didn't always wear rank or come with shiny stripes. Sometimes it came in quiet voices, calloused hands, and a spine inked with stories no one was ever supposed to hear. By now, the others had noticed. Mechanics from neighboring bays wandered in, pretending to check parts that didn't need checking just to get a look. Not at the helicopter, at her. They didn't speak, they just watched. Watched the way Ellie traced fuel lines with her knuckles felt for tiny vibrations no machine could register. Watched her spot a worn-out pin hidden behind layers of cables, something most crews wouldn't have caught for another 50 flight hours. Maybe longer. No announcement, no drama. She simply logged it, tagged it, and moved on. Rodriguez stood with his arms at his sides now, more student than soldier. "I've read every manual," he said, almost to himself. "But I've never seen anyone do it like this." Ellie didn't turn. "Manuals tell you what to check, not what to feel, and just like that the lesson landed. Not in a lecture, not in a slideshow, but in the silence between her sentences. In the space where trust is built not from what you say, but from how you show up. When no one's watching." Ellie didn't brag. She didn't explain what she was doing. But every move she made taught something. She was underneath the forward fuselage now, inspecting a support bracket barely visible from the outside. Her headlamp flickered over a series of bolts, then stopped. She didn't speak for a second. Just stared. Thinking. Then she looked up at Rodriguez. This was torqued too tight. Rodriguez squinted. "Isn't that a good thing?" She shook her head slowly. "Not when it stresses the joint. Under load, it'll crack." He didn't argue. He just took notes, real ones this time. Because this wasn't textbook. This was field logic. The kind that comes from fixing aircraft mid-storm on sand-covered tarmacs under threat of mortar fire, knowing if you missed something, people died. Ellie didn't have medals, didn't want them. She had standards. And the way she touched that frame careful exact wasn't just inspection. It was memory. It was loss. And it was making damn sure that no one else would pay for a mistake that could have been caught. If only someone had cared enough to look. Ellie moved to the main rotor hub, the crown of the aircraft where every ounce of imbalance turns deadly in flight. She crouched, ran 2 fingers along the blade collar, then stopped. "This one's tracking off." Rodriguez frowned, checked the digital readout. "It's within tolerance." Ellie didn't even look up. Not in hover. She stepped back, turned to the tool cart, and pulled a tension gauge that hadn't been used all day. "Blade drift. You'll feel it after 30 seconds in air hover. That's when it matters." Rodriguez didn't argue this time, because now he could see what she was doing wasn't guesswork. It was instinct. Or maybe something deeper, like the body remembering what the mind doesn't want to relive. Every tap, every touch, every tiny adjustment. It was like her hands knew what failure felt like and refused to let it happen again. The other techs watching weren't mocking anymore. They were quiet, focused, leaning in like students. Because even if they didn't understand how she knew, they were finally starting to understand why it mattered. Ellie tightened the last bolt, then reached for a checklist, one she carried herself. Not digital, not official, just laminated paper worn soft at the corners. Rodriguez stepped closer, curious. "That your own log?" She nodded once. "Wrote it years ago, after Kandahar." He didn't press, didn't need to, but something about the way she said after told him everything. She marked a box, paused at the next line, fingers still. "This bird's ready," she said. Then quietly, almost to herself, "They always leave the belly unchecked. Too awkward, too easy to skip." Rodriguez swallowed. He remembered skipping it last week. She glanced at him, not with judgment, but with that quiet, knowing look only people who've buried regret learn to give. "It's never the things you expect that bring them down," she said. "It's the corners, the shortcuts." And right there, without raising her voice or quoting a regulation, she taught them the one rule, no manual prints. You don't just check a machine, you protect the people who'll sit inside it. Ellie stood up slowly, knees cracking as she rose. Not from weakness, just time. She wiped the dust off her hands, then walked over to the duty desk where the inspection log waited. Rodriguez followed. He didn't have a clipboard, he didn't need one. He was there to witness. Ellie flipped to the final page, signed her name in firm, even strokes. Not hurried, not showy, just exact like everything she did. The sergeant at the desk, older than most, took the form and glanced at the signature. Then he paused. His eyes didn't go wide. He didn't gasp. He just nodded, almost imperceptibly, because he'd seen that name once before, on a damage report from a mission that technically never existed, signed in the same block letters, by someone listed MIA. "Thank you, ma'am," he said, voice low. Ellie just gave him a half smile. Not warmth, just understanding. Because when you've walked through fire, the only people who really see you are the ones who've been singed too. The hangar went back to work on the surface anyway. Engines whirred, tools buzzed, radios crackled, but something in the air had shifted, like the room had learned to listen. Ellie didn't stick around to soak in the silence. She packed up her tools the same way she unpacked them, quiet, precise, no wasted motion. But even as she moved, the story moved with her. Rodriguez caught two airmen whispering near the water cooler, low voices, stolen glances. "You saw the ink, right? I heard she walked through hell to get back. No record anywhere, means it's real." Ellie didn't hear it. Or maybe she did. She just didn't respond. Because stories like hers, they don't spread from bragging. They echo through respect. Reeves, the oldest wrench on base, passed her by with a nod. No words. Just the kind of look a man gives when he knows exactly who someone used to be, and what it costs to keep being her. Ellie hoisted her box, stood tall, still alone, but not invisible anymore. And sometimes, for people like her, that's the closest thing to being seen. Colonel Harlan sat alone in his office, Ellie's inspection report open on the desk. It was perfect. Clean, direct, thorough, just like her. 3 small notations circled in red. Each one could have led to disaster if left untouched. Each one missed by his crew. He didn't feel ashamed. He felt reminded. He stared at her signature again. Not just the name, the way it was written. Block letters, hard pressure, like she wasn't just signing off on a checklist, she was signing off on someone's life. He reached for his phone. "Command. This is Harlan at Falcon Ridge. I need verification on civilian contractor Eleanor Rowe, priority Alpha." A pause. Then a quiet voice on the other end. "You don't have clearance for that name, sir?" Silence. Acknowledged. He hung up, leaned back in his chair. For a moment he didn't see the hangar, or the clipboard, or even her. He saw a storm, a downed chopper, and someone walking through fire alone because no one else could. And somehow, she still showed up to fix things. Colonel Harlan sat in stillness for a long time. Phone silent. Door closed. Report open. He traced a finger along one of the red circles Ellie had marked. Barely noticeable stress on a rear tail bracket, something his best crews had missed 3 times in a row. She found it in under 15 minutes. He reached into his desk, pulled out an old folder, one without any markings on the outside. Inside, a single photo, faded and creased. A woman in desert fatigues kneeling beside wreckage. No name, no timestamp, no mission attached. But the eyes, same as hers. The kind that had seen things no briefing could explain. The kind that didn't flinch anymore, not because they were fearless, but because they'd already paid the price. He whispered to the empty room. What else have we forgotten? Because if she was still here, still working, still watching. What else had the world buried? What other names had they erased while pretending to protect them? And how many more like her were out there doing the job? No one thanked them for, just because it needed doing. Later that afternoon, as the sun dragged long shadows across the tarmac, Ellie stepped out of Hangar 7 with her toolbox in hand. Same slow walk, same beat-up boots. Colonel Harlan was already waiting by the gate. He didn't bark orders. He didn't pretend to be in charge. He just walked beside her for a moment, matching her pace. "I can reassign you," he said. "Put you on desk reviews, cleaner work, less hassle." She didn't stop walking. "I'm not here for clean." Then, maybe something with fewer kids around, he offered. People who know when to shut up and listen. Ellie gave a dry chuckle. "They won't learn if they're never tested." He nodded. It made sense. Of course it did. Still something gnawed at him. After what happened this morning. "Why'd you stay and finish the job?" She looked over, eyes steady. "Because if I don't..." Someone flies with that bracket cracked. It wasn't defiance, it wasn't pride, it was duty. And in that moment, Harlan understood she wasn't just fixing the aircraft. She was fixing what the system forgot. They stopped near the fence line where the buzz of the base faded into desert wind. Planes in the distance, heat rising off the concrete. Harlan looked at her not as a commander, but as a man standing next to someone who'd carried more than most. "There's no record of you, Eleanor," he said quietly. "Not in the system, not in personnel files. You don't officially exist." She didn't look surprised. "Good. Means I did it right," he sighed. "But that's the problem, isn't it? No medals, no papers, not even a name and a footnote." Ellie shifted the weight of her toolbox eyes scanning the horizon. "Didn't carry a rifle to be remembered. I carried it so someone else could be. It wasn't heroic, it wasn't rehearsed, it was just true." Harlan stared at her for a beat. "If I made it official, put you on record, you'd get recognition." Ellie turned to face him fully for the first time. "Don't need recognition. Just need the next crew not to skip the damn belly panel. Because for people like her, legacy isn't about being known. It's about making sure no one pays for your silence." Back in the mess hall, word had already spread. Not the dramatic version, not the viral gossip, just the real story. Told in low voices passed over trays of mashed potatoes and rehydrated coffee. "She's the one from Hangar 7, right?" "Yeah." "The triangle tattoo. Black Ops stuff. I heard she found a stress crack the scanners missed. Heard she saved a flight without even raising her voice. No one said her name too loud. Not out of fear, out of respect. Like saying it too boldly might undo the quiet weight of what she was." At a far table, Jake Mitchell sat, stiff-backed uniform, perfect hands folded. He hadn't touched his food. Across from him, his supervisor, Tech Sergeant Mills, didn't lecture, didn't scold. He just said, "Next time you feel like proving your authority, prove your knowledge instead." Jake nodded, slowly, then looked down, because the lesson had landed. And sometimes the loudest apology you can give is sitting still, shutting up, and listening to what you almost ruined. That evening, Rodriguez found Jake standing alone near the flight line. The sun was gone, but the tarmac still radiated heat. Planes sat in quiet rows ready for morning operations. Jake didn't say anything at first, didn't have to. His posture set it all rigid, unsure, smaller than usual. Rodriguez walked up beside him, hands in his pockets. "You know what you did right?" Jake nodded once. "Yeah." Rodriguez looked out at the aircraft lights blinking in the dark. "My grandfather served in Vietnam. Intelligence. Used to tell me about people like her, like Ellie." Rodriguez nodded. "Said the real ones never talk about what they did, because they didn't do it to be remembered. They did it so others could forget how close we came to losing everything." Jake swallowed hard. "I didn't see it." "None of us did," Rodriguez said. "But she wasn't hiding, we just never bothered to look, and for a moment neither said a word. Because sometimes growth doesn't come from being taught. It comes from realizing too late that you should have asked before you judged." Ellie reached the gate just as the base lights began their shift from white to amber golden shadows stretching across concrete. She handed her ID to the senior gate sergeant, same as always. Nothing flashy, nothing special, but this time he paused. His hand hovered over the scanner for a second longer than usual, not because of a malfunction, because he recognized something. Not her name, not her record, but her eyes. He'd seen them before on people who'd come back from places no one talked about. People who carried silence like armor. He didn't ask questions, he didn't even smile. Just handed the ID back, met her gaze, and said, "Have a good evening, ma'am." Ellie gave a small nod. "You too, Sergeant." Then she walked out into the desert air toolbox, in one hand, wind tugging at the cuff of her sleeve just enough to reveal the very top edge of that triangle. Not hidden, not flaunted, just there. And sometimes that's all it takes for someone to remember. That respect doesn't have to be loud, it just has to be earned. 3 weeks later, another civilian contractor walked into Hangar 7. Younger, confident, clipboard in hand. No one made a comment, no one tested her. Instead, they offered tools, helped carry gear, cleared a spot near the airframe without being asked. It wasn't about politeness, it was about learning. Because something had changed in that hangar quietly, but deeply. Not a policy, not a rule, a culture. The techs didn't gossip about Ellie anymore, they didn't need to. They'd absorbed what mattered, treat everyone like they might have a story you don't know, ask before you judge, and never mistake silence for weakness. Master Sergeant Reeves began including a new lesson in his maintenance briefings. Check the underside of every system. And the underside of every person, too. He never mentioned her name, but they all knew who he meant. Because you don't have to retell certain stories. You just pass along the change they left behind. Colonel Harlan kept Ellie's final inspection report on his desk for weeks. Not because it had errors, it didn't. Not because he needed to reference it, he didn't. He kept it because it meant something. It reminded him that excellence doesn't announce itself. It walks in quiet and steady, fixes what needs fixing, and leaves the place better than it found it. Every red circle she marked was a story that never had to be told. A mistake that never made the news. A life that didn't get lost. And not once did she ask for credit. Not one speech, not one line about sacrifice. She just showed up, did the job, and left. And that's the kind of hero no parade ever celebrates. But when Harlan looked out at the hangar from his office window, saw a team working together, careful, alert, respectful, he didn't see a training success. He saw her fingerprints. Because sometimes the most powerful legacy is the one that doesn't carry your name, just your standards. Jake Mitchell stood in front of the disciplinary board 2 days later. Not a courtroom, but it felt like one. 3 senior NCOs, 1 major, a chair too small for his uniform. The reprimand was official extra duty, mandatory respect training, a note in his file that would follow him, but the real sentence, living with the silence that came after. He tried to explain it once to his roommate to himself. I didn't know who she was, but that wasn't the point. He should have known better, should have seen the way she moved, the way others paused when she entered, should have noticed that kind of calm only came from chaos survived. You don't earn that stillness in a classroom. You earn it when everything's falling apart. And you're the one holding the wrench anyway. Jake left the room with his head down, but something stayed with him. Not guilt, not shame, something quieter. Like a new wire tucked under old panels, a lesson he'd carry every time he reached for authority and felt that pause first. That night, Jake sat alone at the far corner of the base canteen. No uniform, just sweats and a tray of food he wasn't eating. The place was quiet. Just the clink of forks and the low hum of TVs no one really watched. Master Sergeant Reeves spotted him, walked over, sat down across the table without asking. Didn't lecture, didn't scold. He just looked at the untouched mashed potatoes and said, "You know what you did today, son?" Jake nodded slow. "Yeah, and I don't know how to fix it." Reeves didn't blink. "You don't fix something like that with words. You fix it by who you are after." Jake looked up. "And if it's too late, then you show up earlier next time." Silence settled between them, not awkward, just heavy with meaning, because not all apologies come wrapped in speeches. Some are just a shift in posture, a softer tone, a hand that hesitates before pointing, and maybe, just maybe, that's where better men begin. 3 days later, the hangar was back to normal, at least on the surface. Wrenches clanked. Radios buzzed. Rotors spun up like clockwork. But beneath it all, there was a new kind of stillness, the kind that settles in after something important happens, the kind that makes you double-check a torque bolt, the kind that makes you look twice at someone before cracking a joke. Jake felt it most when he stepped into Hangar 7 again. No one stared. No one said his name. But conversations paused just half a second when he passed by. And he knew why. It wasn't shame. It was recognition that every mechanic in there had heard what happened, and now they were watching to see what he did next. He didn't strut, didn't bark orders. He just rolled up his sleeves and got to work silently checking the same hydraulic line Ellie once corrected. Not to impress, to understand. Because sometimes respect isn't about what people say about you. It's about what they wait to see when you think no one's looking. At the next maintenance orientation, Reeves stood in front of a fresh group of recruits. No PowerPoint, no checklist, just a quiet pause before he spoke. "You're going to meet a lot of people in this job, some loud, some quiet, some who talk a big game and some who don't say much but still leave you in the dust." He looked around the room. Young faces, clean boots, eager eyes. "Here's what I care about, how you treat the ones you don't understand." He didn't mention Ellie. He didn't need to. He told them about checking their ego at the door, about listening before speaking, and about reading hands, not resumes, for signs of experience. Real professionals don't need to remind you who they are. Their work will do that just fine. One kid raised his hand, half smirking. "So, how do we know who to follow?" Reeves cracked a rare smile. "Watch who others shut up for when they walk in." And that was it. No medals, no names. Just a truth passed down like a tool set, quietly but permanently. Later that week, one of the younger techs, Mason, caught a glimpse of something unusual. He was helping clean up the back bay, reorganizing toolboxes, when he found a grease rag tucked behind an old crate. Nothing special, except it had a faint trace of dried blood. Not fresh, but not forgotten either. Curious, he brought it to Sergeant Reeves. "Find this back near Bay 3. Someone cut themselves. Reeves took one look, folded it gently, set it aside. No accident. Leave it be. Mason hesitated. You know who it was? Reeves didn't answer directly, just stared out toward the far hangar wall. Some people don't leave blood by mistake. They leave it because the job demanded it. Mason didn't ask again, but that moment stayed with him. Because it wasn't about a rag. It was about recognizing signs. Signs that someone had been there, had worked, bled, and walked away without asking for thanks. And maybe, just maybe, those are the people you should be paying the closest attention to. A week passed. Mason couldn't stop thinking about the rag. Not because of the blood he'd seen cuts before. Everyone had. It was something else, the way Reeves had folded it like it meant something. Like it wasn't just cloth, but memory. Later, during a late shift, Mason found himself working alongside an older tech Lenny retired once came back part-time. As they worked on a rotor hub, Mason noticed Lenny staring at his hands. Then, Lenny spoke voice low. Ever meet someone whose hands speak before they do? Mason looked up, nodded. I think I did. Didn't say much, but she saw everything. Lenny smiled, sad and knowing. Yeah, that sounds like her. You knew her long time ago. Different country, different name. But those hands, I'd know 'em anywhere. And in that moment, Mason understood Ellie wasn't just a contractor. She was a chapter in their history written in grease scars and silence. And those hands they'd held more than wrenches. They'd held the weight of missions no one was allowed to remember. Colonel Daniels sat alone in his office that evening, lights dimmed, base quiet. A routine check-in from higher command had landed on his desk, digital clearance, refresh basic stuff. But one line caught his eye. Contractor, number 451, E. Warren, clearance level classified, Echo Red do not query, further, Echo Red. He hadn't seen that tag in years. Curiosity tugged the kind that even discipline can't fully silence. So he keyed in his override. Just once, just to see something. What came back? Nothing. Just a black screen with one line of text. Access denied. Not your war. He leaned back, exhaled slow, because he'd heard rumors. About ghosts in coveralls. About names scrubbed clean from the system but never forgotten by those who served beside them. And now, he knew. Ellie wasn't just a mechanic, she was a reminder. That some battles don't leave medals, that some files stay locked not to hide shame but to protect the ones who carried it all. He closed the terminal, sat there for a while, and whispered, thank you to someone who'd never hear it, but had earned it long before he ever knew her name. 3 months later, a young airman named Hall was pulling late watch when he saw her again. Ellie. No clipboard this time, no inspection, just walking across the tarmac at dawn, boots crunching on gravel jacket zipped tight against the wind. He hesitated, then called out, Ma'am, you coming back to inspect? She paused, looked at him, really looked, like she was reading a file only she could see. Not today, Hall nodded, but something in him stirred. Ma'am? What you did that day. It changed things. Her lips barely moved. I didn't do anything. Exactly, he said, and that's what hit hardest. She held his gaze for a moment, then gave the smallest smile. Then maybe you're starting to get it. And just like that, she kept walking, disappearing into the morning haze. But Hall stood still, heart pounding, because sometimes the quiet ones don't just leave behind reports or regulations. They leave behind conviction. A memory. A shift in how you see people. And you don't forget that. Not when it's real. Not when it's human. Ellie never told anyone what happened in 2011. Not the full story. Not the names. Not even when they asked with quiet respect in their voices. The only thing she ever said once quietly when a senior NCO asked what it was like was this, we didn't all make it home, but the mission did. That was it. No tears, no drama, just truth wrapped in steel. What she did say came through her hands fixing aircraft like lives depended on it, because she knew better than anyone they did. She never corrected the rumors, never reminded anyone what she'd done. She didn't have to. By then, people had learned to read between the silence, and the silence said everything. That dignity didn't need an audience, that sacrifice didn't need a stage, that the ones who carried the heaviest burdens were often the ones who spoke the softest. Ellie didn't need to tell her story, because by then, it was already living in every mechanic who looked twice before speaking, in every young recruit who chose respect first, and that was enough. A year later, Ellie was gone. No farewell speech, no ceremony, just an empty locker wiped clean. Tools returned. Badge turned in. but her presence still there, in the way the youngest airman greeted every contractor with a "yes, ma'am," no matter their age. In how the old mechanics paused felt with their fingers not just trusted the scanners, in how people stopped assuming, started asking. Rodriguez had taken over hangar lead by then. First order he gave, "Respect everyone," or "You're off my team." No one questioned it, because they remembered. They remembered how one quiet woman shifted the culture without raising her voice, how she taught them that rank means less than character, that strength often walks in worn boots with eyes that have seen too much and still choose to serve. Colonel Daniels still kept her final inspection report on his desk, not for the technical notes, but for what it represented. And every now and then, when a new recruit asked, "Who was she?" the answer came soft but solid. The kind of person you only meet once and never forget.